To walk us through this all-important summit going on in Egypt, let's talk to the head at interim independent redress mechanism, Green Climate Fund, Ibrahim Pam, who joins us live via Zoom from Egypt. Thank you for joining us on TVC News at 10. There are a lot of talks about loss and damage agenda. What really does this mean?
Well, this is the first time, and it's really a landmark event that we have on the agenda a discussion for assessing a framework for loss and damage to countries that have suffered the adverse effects of climate change, developing countries. And of course, leading the charge today has been, and in the last couple of days, has been the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who had described the current situation as the world being on the highway to climate hell. I think that's pretty significant and very heavy support. And in your report, you did play some of his counsel around having to organize this financing arrangement. And of course, the Pakistan Prime Minister, who's also speaking very strongly on this. Significantly, we also had the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, who has been the world's greatest advocate for developing countries. And she also spoke about addressing loss and damage, including by imposing a tax on major oil companies. So the whole discussion is about how do you recompense countries that have suffered from damage and from loss that has occurred from the adverse effects of climate change. That's the focus of the discussion.
All right. And you've said that is a landmark, and that's quite interesting. But then we know that countries have been talking about climate change, but we also know that talk is cheap. Just how committed would you say countries have been to fighting this?
Well, indeed, talk is cheap, but it leads to more important outcomes. And this talk has been going on since the Rio summit in 1992. And now you've seen this progressive increase in attention paid to climate change, its adverse effects, more and more financing coming towards it. And that's why it's important to talk, because that's the starting point. And so these discussions now have advanced to the point where we are actually now speaking much more strongly about financing to address loss and damage, and also to address adaptation, build resilience, and also mitigation. So very important roadmaps are being drawn. And I think today, again, we've seen the African states come together in the Africa Day. And there was a reception hosted by the Afreximbank and the African Union, where very important statements were made on the African position, Africa being one of the most ravaged continents. And you had Professor Keorama, the president and chair of the board of Afreximbank, speaking strongly, advising negotiators on how to proceed.
All right, but then in the face of rising energy prices, the war in Ukraine and other issues, there are concerns that climate change might just drop on the priority list of government. What do you say?
Well, this is true. I mean, obviously there's shifting global priorities, but the fact that you have very significant presence, and you did mention that the president of the United States of America, Joe Biden, will be here on Friday. And in the build-up to this, you had 110 presidents and heads of states attending the summit. That is a significant indicator of the level of political support. And with the UN Secretary General, all of this is indicative of the global consensus that is really at the core of bringing together. But let me say as well that in addition to the politicians, COP27, as other COPs before it, has a very strong representation of youth advocates, of climate advocates, of the private sector, of multilateral development banks, of other financial institutions, of scientists. So it's a whole, the collective will of the global community is at play here. Yeah. And I don't think it would drop off the agenda.
I will look forward to the discourse and the agreement, the consensus that would actually be reached in the course of COP27. Head at Interim Independent Redress Mechanism, Green Climate Fund, Ibrahim Pam, thank you for your time on TVC News at 10.
Thank you very much.